Hello, and welcome to another Lincoln property blog, brought to you by Ben from Walters of Lincolnshire. This week we look at, is the gap between Lincoln 2-bed and 3-bed homes really stopping people moving? Over the last few weeks, there has been a growing narrative in the national press suggesting that the housing ladder is becoming increasingly difficult to climb. Much of this centres around the widening gap between smaller and larger homes, with many commentators suggesting that homeowners are becoming stuck and unable to move up. There is some truth in that argument. However, when you look at the Lincoln property market in detail, the picture is not quite as straightforward. So what is the changing price gap in Lincoln? If we compare the average asking prices of 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom homes in Lincoln between 2006 and 2026, the shift is clear. In 2006, the average asking price of a 2-bedroom home in Lincoln was £131,770, whilst a typical 3-bedroom home sat at £149,800, creating a gap of £18,030, which represented a difference of 14%. Fast forward to 2026, and those figures have moved to £169,570 for a 2-bedroom home and £238,450 for a 3-bedroom home. The gap is now £68,880, equating to a difference of 41%. On the face of it, that is a significant widening. It would be easy to conclude that this alone is making it harder for Lincoln homeowners to move up the ladder. Yet that conclusion only tells part of the story. Next, we look at why the headline gap does not tell the whole story. Property is often discussed in terms of price, but in reality, most buyers make decisions based on affordability, and affordability is driven far more by monthly mortgage payments than by headline values. Back in 2006, 95% first-time buyer mortgage rates were typically between 5.5% and 6%, and in many cases higher. Borrowing was more expensive, and monthly repayments reflected that. Today, whilst mortgage rates have moved around in recent years, they remain below those mid-2000s levels for many borrowers. At the time of writing, the best 95% first-time buyer mortgage on the market is 4.74%. This means that although the price gap between 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom homes has increased, the cost of bridging that gap has not risen at the same rate. Now let me show that using Lincoln figures. Looking at a typical 95% loan-to-value mortgage at 5.8% on a 25-year term, the monthly cost of a 2-bedroom home in Lincoln in 2006 was £791 per month. For a 3-bedroom home, it was approximately £900 per month. That's a difference of roughly £108 per month between a 2-bed to a 3-bed Lincoln home. Fast forward to today, looking at a 95% loan-to-value mortgage at 4.74% on a 25-year term, the monthly cost of a 2-bedroom home in Lincoln sits at around £917 per month, whilst a 3-bedroom home is £1,290 per month. That creates a gap of around £373 per month. On the surface, that looks like a significant jump. However, this is where context matters. This article is about making the step up the ladder from a 2-bed to a 3-bed Lincoln home. Most homeowners moving from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom home are not doing so at 95% loan to value. By the time they make that move, they have typically owned their property for 5 or 6 years. During that time, they have built up equity through repayments and, in many cases, house price growth. That means their next purchase would be funded at a lower loan to value of around 75%, because they would have built up that equity as mentioned in the previous paragraph. So when you look at the numbers on that basis, the picture changes again. The best 75% loan to value mortgage today is 4.04%, making the monthly mortgage cost of a typical 3-bedroom Lincoln home, even with the higher price, £948 per month. In other words, whilst the price gap between Lincoln 2-bed and 3-bed homes has widened, the real cost of stepping up the ladder for existing homeowners, when viewed through the lens of how people actually move, that is mortgage payments, has increased, yet the growth of that increase has been lessened because of the increase in equity, lower loan-to-value, and lower mortgage rates. So what is the role of wages and household income? Another factor that is often overlooked in this discussion is income. Over the past 2 decades, real household earnings have increased by 5.8%. That's after inflation. Not uniformly and not without periods of pressure, but the overall direction has been upward. Alongside this, dual-income households have become more common, and lenders now assess affordability with a broader view of income and expenditure than they did in the past. When this is considered alongside mortgage costs, it becomes clear that today's buyers are operating in a very different financial environment to those in 2006. So why does it feel harder to move in Lincoln? If the financial picture is more balanced than the headlines suggest, why does it feel more difficult for homeowners to move up the ladder? The answer lies partly in perception. Many Lincoln homeowners understandably focus on the price difference between homes. Seeing a larger gap can be off-putting, particularly when combined with wider economic uncertainty and cautious media coverage. At the same time, certain parts of the market, particularly flats, have seen slower price growth than houses. This can make it harder for some homeowners to build the level of equity they had expected. As a result, a number of potential movers pause and delay their plans, or decide not to explore their options at all. What this means for the Lincoln market. In every property market, there will always be households for whom moving is not currently viable. However, there is also a significant group of homeowners who assume that moving is out of reach, when in reality it may still be achievable. This group is important, because when fewer people take the step to explore a move, the market can appear quieter than it actually needs to be. Lincoln is a property market that is cautious, not broken. The Lincoln housing market is not broken. It is at present more cautious. The difference matters. A cautious market is one where decisions take longer, confidence is more measured, and buyers and sellers seek greater certainty. It is not a market without movement. Indeed, those homeowners who are moving successfully today tend to be those who look beyond headline figures and instead focus on their individual circumstances. They consider their available equity, their household income, and the actual monthly cost of a move, rather than simply the price gap between properties. What is the bottom line for Lincoln homeowners? There is no question that the price gap between 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom homes in Lincoln has widened since 2006. However, that gap on its own does not determine whether a move is possible. Mortgage costs, income levels, and individual financial positions all play an equally important role. For some, moving up the ladder will remain a challenge. For others, the move may be more achievable than they initially think. The key is not to rely solely on national headlines or broad assumptions. Every Lincoln homeowner's position is different, and the only way to understand what is possible is to look at the numbers in the context of your own circumstances. If you are considering a move and want a clear, data-led view of what that might look like for you in today's Lincoln market, it is always worth having that conversation early. Often the reality is more encouraging than expected. For more insights and information, visit the Lincoln Property blog at walters-property.com/blog. Until next time, take care. If you are thinking about selling and want an honest, evidence-based opinion on your Lincoln home's actual market value, with no fluff, no pressure, and no nonsense, I would be delighted to help. To ensure all our clients get the absolute best experience and a total marketing strategy as unique as their homes, we only list 20 properties per month. Our April and May market appraisal slots are now available to book. We ensure that you are always a name, and not just a number, with Walters.